I remember the night everything started to feel off. Ethan had been coming home later than usual, always saying he was stuck in meetings or handling some urgent property deal. I tried to believe him because that's what you do when you love someone. You trust them. But deep down, something didn't sit right. His tone had changed, his eyes looked distant, and our conversations became shorter. It felt like I was living with a polite stranger instead of the man I'd shared a decade with. Then came the day that broke the quiet pattern of our home. I was setting the table for dinner when Ethan walked in, all smiles, holding the hand of a woman I'd never seen before. "Lena, this is Tessa," he said casually, as if introducing a friend from work. She looked younger than me, confident, dressed sharply, with that kind of forced politeness you give when you already feel comfortable in someone else's space. Before I could even process who she was, Ethan continued. "Tessa's going through a tough time right now. She'll be staying with us for a bit while we work on a new real estate project together." My heart stopped. "Staying with us?" I looked at him, waiting for him to laugh, to say it was temporary, but his tone was final. I smiled because I didn't know what else to do. I told myself it was temporary, that maybe I was overthinking, but every fiber of my body screamed that something was wrong. That night, as we sat at dinner, I watched the two of them share private smiles and inside jokes. He complimented her cooking when she offered to help, and I just sat there, nodding, pretending not to notice the tension under every word. The next few days were unbearable. Tessa made herself comfortable fast. She moved her clothes into the guest room, started leaving her perfume bottles in the hallway bathroom, and even joined Ethan on his morning jogs, something he and I used to do together. I tried to talk to him about how uncomfortable it was, but he brushed me off. "Lena, don't be dramatic," he said. "She's just staying for a while. Don't make this into something it's not." But it was something. Every time she smiled at him, every time he laughed a little too hard at her jokes, a part of me broke. I barely recognized the man who once promised to build a life with me. Nights became longer, the silence louder. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how my home, our home, had turned into a place I didn't feel welcome in any. I didn't know it then, but that moment, that quiet dinner with his so-called business partner, was the beginning of the end. The woman sitting across the table wasn't just a guest. She was the storm that would take everything I'd built, and the man I thought I knew would help her do it. From the second week, it became clear that Tessa wasn't planning to leave anytime soon. She moved around the house like she owned it. She'd wake up early, walk into the kitchen in one of her silk robes, and make herself coffee using my favorite mug, the one Ethan had gifted me on our 5th anniversary. She'd hum softly, smiling at Ethan as if I wasn't even standing there. She started changing things little by little. At first, it was small, switching out the curtains, moving my plants, rearranging the living room furniture. Then, she started bringing in her own decorations. A bright red throw blanket appeared on the couch one morning, and a framed picture of her and Ethan from some work event was suddenly on the hallway table. Every change felt like a quiet invasion, as if she was slowly erasing me from the house I had built. I tried to talk to Ethan about it one night while he was watching TV. I told him I was uncomfortable with how much space Tessa was taking up, and how her presence didn't feel temporary at all. He didn't even look up from the screen. "You're overreacting, Lena," he said, his voice flat. "She's helping me with the new project. You should be supportive instead of jealous." That word, jealous, hit me hard. I wasn't jealous. I was angry, hurt, and confused. But he made it sound like I was some bitter woman clinging to attention. When I tried to explain again, he sighed and said, "Can you stop making everything about you for once? Not everything is an attack." Then he walked away, leaving me standing there with tears in my eyes. The next morning, I found Tessa using my bathroom, her makeup spread across the counter. When she saw me, she smiled casually and said, "Hope you don't mind. The lighting in here is way better." I wanted to scream, but I just nodded and left. That day, something inside me cracked. Later that week, I tried one last time to make Ethan see what was happening. I told him it wasn't right for her to live with us, that I felt pushed out of my own home. He finally looked at me, but not with love or understanding. His face was cold. "You're making things difficult for no reason," he said. "And by the way, you might want to remember, the house is technically under my name. I could ask you to leave if I wanted to." It was like a slap. He'd never spoken to me like that before. For years, we made decisions together. We shared everything, or at least I thought we did. Hearing him use the word "my" instead of "our" cut deeper than any insult. In that moment, I realized I wasn't his partner anymore. I was an inconvenience standing in the way of whatever he wanted next. And Tessa? She knew it too. Her smile that night said everything. She had already won the space that once belonged to me. Tessa's presence grew heavier with each passing day. She no longer acted like a guest. She started making breakfast every morning, wearing Ethan's shirts, and leaving her things on the kitchen counter as if she lived there. Sometimes she'd even answer the door when friends or delivery people came by, smiling as if she owned the place. When I tried to reclaim small things, like cooking dinner or setting the table, Ethan would tell me to relax, that Tessa was just helping out. I felt like a stranger in my own home. The warmth that once filled our mornings was gone. Now, I woke up to the sound of Tessa's laughter echoing through the hallway and Ethan's voice following it. When I tried to talk to him about how it made me feel, he brushed me off every time. "You're imagining things," he said once. "You're always so sensitive lately." His calm tone made me feel like I was the problem. Then small things started disappearing. A file I'd left on the office desk, a bank statement I'd planned to review, an insurance letter that came addressed only to Ethan. I didn't think much of it at first, but soon I noticed a pattern. My name wasn't on our joint account anymore. I checked online banking one night and couldn't log in. When I asked Ethan about it, he said it was just a security update and that he'd handle it later. But the way he said it made my stomach twist. One afternoon, while Ethan was out, I looked through the desk drawer where we kept important papers. Half of the folders were missing. The ones left behind looked different. New signatures, new headers, and in some places, my name was just gone. It was like I'd been slowly erased from our life on paper. When I confronted him that night, I didn't even try to hide how upset I was. "Ethan, what's going on? Why is my name missing from our accounts? Why are documents disappearing?" I demanded. He stared at me with an expression I didn't recognize, cold and detached. "You're paranoid," he said sharply. "You always make things harder than they need to be." I pressed again, refusing to let it go this time. That's when he snapped. He stood up, his voice rising for the first time. "You should be grateful I'm letting you stay here at all," he shouted. "You have no idea how much I've done for you." The words hit me like a punch. Letting me stay? This was my home. I helped build it. But in that moment, I realized he didn't see it that way anymore. To him, I was just someone taking up space in a house that he now saw as his. When I went to bed that night, I didn't cry. I just stared at the ceiling. Something deeper than betrayal settled in me, a cold, heavy truth. This wasn't just about another woman. This was about control. Something dark was happening behind my back, and for the first time, I understood that Ethan wasn't just lying. He was planning something far worse. One night when Ethan and Tessa went out for dinner, I finally gave in to the gnawing feeling that wouldn't leave me alone. I went into the home office quietly, my heart racing. The room smelled like his cologne and paper. The drawers that used to be neatly organized were now locked, but I knew where he kept the spare key, taped under the printer tray. I opened the drawer and began searching through the folders one by one. At first, it looked like regular paperwork, mortgage statements, bank files, receipts. Then, in one thick folder, I saw something that made my hands shake. It was a set of documents titled Property Transfer and Refinance Agreement. My name was nowhere on them. Instead, the house was listed under Ethan and Tessa's name. The signatures were fresh, the ink still slightly darker than the rest. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I flipped through the pages again and again, thinking maybe it was a mistake. But there it was, Ethan's signature, Tessa's, and a forged version of mine on one of the earlier documents. It looked close enough to fool anyone, but I knew my own handwriting. The loops were wrong. The L in my name wasn't mine. My stomach dropped. I sat there for a long time, staring at the papers, my mind racing back to a few months ago when I'd been sick with pneumonia. I remembered Ethan handling all the bills and paperwork back then, telling me to just sign here for some refinancing. I'd barely been able to get out of bed at the time. I didn't question him. I trusted him completely. Now I understood what he had done. He had used that moment of weakness to take everything from me. When Ethan came home that night, I was waiting for him. The folder sat open on the coffee table. He looked at it and didn't even flinch. "So you found it," he said, his voice calm. I asked him what this was, why my name wasn't on the house anymore. He leaned against the wall, crossed his arms, and gave me a small, cruel smirk. "You really should have paid more attention," he said. "You signed the power of attorney months ago, remember? You gave me the right to make those decisions." I felt sick. I was sick, Ethan. I didn't even know what I was signing. He shrugged, his expression cold. "That's not my problem. You trusted me, and I took care of things." Those words, "I took care of things," made my skin crawl. He spoke like someone who had won a game I didn't even know I was playing. I realized Tessa wasn't just his affair. She was his partner in this entire setup. I looked at both of them standing there, Ethan calm, Tessa smugly leaning against the doorway, and it hit me with full force. They hadn't just taken my marriage. They'd taken my home, my savings, and the life I'd built from the ground up. That night, I packed a small bag and locked myself in the guest room. I didn't cry. I just sat there, cold and silent, realizing I had been living next to a stranger who had stolen everything from me while I was too blind to see it. I woke up the next morning to the sound of engines outside. For a moment, I thought it was just another delivery, but when I looked out the window, I froze. 2 moving trucks were parked in the driveway, and strangers were carrying boxes out of the house. My heart started pounding. I rushed downstairs, still in my robe, trying to understand what was happening. When I stepped outside, Ethan and Tessa were standing by the door, dressed neatly as if this had all been planned for days. One of the movers looked at me awkwardly, unsure whether to speak. Before I could ask what was going on, a man in a suit approached and handed me an envelope. "Mrs. Matthews," he said, "you've been served." I opened the envelope with trembling hands. It was an eviction notice. The words blurred as I read them: "Vacate the premises immediately." I looked up at Ethan, hoping this was some horrible mistake. He didn't look guilty. He didn't even look angry. He looked proud. "What is this?" I asked, my voice shaking. He didn't hesitate. "You don't live here anymore," he said flatly. "The house is ours now." I stared at him, my mind spinning. "Ethan, this is my home. I helped build this house. You can't just..." He cut me off with a smirk. "Legally, I can. You signed everything over, remember? You made this easy." Tessa stood beside him with her arms crossed, watching me with that same smug look I'd grown to hate. She didn't say a word, but her smile said everything. This was what she wanted all along, to take my place completely. I walked back inside, the house suddenly feeling like a stranger's place. The walls, the photos, the furniture, everything I'd poured my heart into now felt like it belonged to someone else. Movers brushed past me, taking boxes I had packed years ago with love. I wanted to stop them, to scream, to fight, but something inside me went quiet. I went upstairs to grab what little I could, my purse, a few clothes, and a photo of my parents that I kept beside my bed. As I packed, I could hear Ethan downstairs giving directions, like he was proud of his new start. Every sound cut through me, but I refused to let him see me break. When I walked out of the front door for the last time, I didn't look back. I could feel their eyes on me, waiting for me to cry, to beg, to make a scene. But I didn't give them that. I just walked to my car, each step heavy but steady. As I sat behind the wheel, my hands trembling, I looked at the house one last time. 10 years of love, work, and loyalty, all gone in a single morning. For a moment, I wanted to scream, but then something inside me shifted. The pain started to harden into something else, a quiet, burning anger. They thought they had destroyed me. They thought taking the house meant they'd taken my life. But as I drove away, I realized they hadn't taken everything. I still had my name, my mind, and the truth. And deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something they never saw coming. I moved into a small apartment on the edge of town, a place I had once designed for a client who later moved away. It wasn't much, just 1 bedroom and a small kitchen, but it was quiet. It smelled like fresh paint and emptiness. I didn't have much to bring with me: a suitcase, a few personal things, and the little money I still had left in my account. The first few nights were hard. I couldn't sleep. Every sound reminded me of what I had lost. But after days of crying and staring at the ceiling, something inside me started to shift. I couldn't let them win. One morning, I sat at the kitchen table with my old laptop and opened my email. I started going through old messages, old receipts, anything that could show me what Ethan had done. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but I knew there had to be something. I checked my cloud storage, old bank statements, and scanned documents I'd saved years ago. Slowly, pieces began to form a picture. Strange transfers, accounts I didn't recognize, payments made to names I'd never seen. I called my old accountant, a quiet man named Stephen who had helped us file taxes years ago. When I told him what happened, there was a long silence on the other end. Then he said, "Lena, I think you should look into the property refinancing record. Something didn't add up last year, but Ethan insisted he had your approval." That one sentence made everything click. Ethan hadn't just betrayed me emotionally, he had used my trust to commit fraud. I spent the next few days gathering everything I could. I found scanned copies of signatures that weren't mine, documents filed with my name spelled slightly wrong, and transactions that led to accounts under Tessa's name. It was all there, proof that they had planned every part of this together. But I knew I couldn't do it alone. That's when I thought of Jacob Price. We'd met years ago through a design project. He was a real estate attorney, sharp and kind, and he had once told me if I ever needed legal help, he'd be there. I hadn't spoken to him in years, but I dialed his number anyway. When he answered, his voice was warm but surprised. I told him everything, not just about the house, but about the documents, the forged signatures, the fake accounts. He listened quietly, and when I finished, there was a pause. Then he said, "Lena, this isn't just wrong, it's illegal. And you have more power than you think." For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. Jacob offered to meet the next day to look over everything. He didn't speak to me out of pity. He spoke like someone who believed I still had a fight to win. That night, as I sat by the window watching the city lights, I realized something. Ethan thought taking the house would end me, but he underestimated me. He forgot that I helped build that house from the ground up, and I could rebuild my life the same way, one piece at a time. Jacob came to my apartment a few days later, bringing his laptop and a thick folder. We spread everything out across my kitchen table, copies of the property transfer, bank records, insurance updates, and the fake signatures I had found. He studied each page carefully, marking notes and comparing details. I sat quietly, watching him move through the papers with the calm focus of someone who had seen this kind of betrayal before. After a long silence, he looked up and said, "Lena, this isn't just fraud. It's identity theft, and it's serious. Ethan used your name to get a second mortgage, and then he transferred the property to a company registered under Tessa's name." My heart sank, but at the same time, I felt a strange sense of clarity. Finally, the truth was in the open. We spent hours building the file. Jacob taught me how to organize everything: financial statements, notarized copies, screenshots of emails, and even voicemail recordings Ethan had accidentally left on my phone months ago. One of them was from a conversation he had with a loan officer, casually mentioning that his wife had already approved everything. I saved every single piece of it. Once Jacob had enough evidence, he told me it was time to act. He filed a civil suit quietly, without alerting Ethan or Tessa. He also contacted the mortgage lender, sending them the documents that proved the signature on the refinancing forms wasn't mine. The bank immediately opened an internal investigation. While all of this was happening, I kept silent. I knew Ethan too well. He would only grow defensive or try to cover his tracks if he sensed trouble. So I played my part. I stayed off his radar and let him believe I was just trying to rebuild my life somewhere far away. I even sent him a short text one evening, saying I'd moved on and wished him the best. He didn't reply, but I didn't need him to. Meanwhile, through mutual friends, I heard that Ethan and Tessa were throwing parties at the house. They posted pictures in local newsletters and attended neighborhood gatherings as if they were some power couple. They had no idea that their celebration was sitting on borrowed time. Every toast, every smile, every night they slept under that roof, all of it was about to collapse. Jacob kept me updated regularly. He explained that once the bank confirmed the fraud, everything Ethan and Tessa owned through those illegal transactions could be frozen. "You don't need to confront them," he told me. "The law will do it for you." For the first time in a long while, I felt peace. Not the kind that comes from forgetting, but the kind that comes from knowing justice is on its way. I didn't tell anyone what was happening. I went to work, I kept to myself, and I waited. I knew that every quiet day brought me closer to the moment when Ethan's lies would finally catch up with him. He thought he had stolen everything, but he didn't realize I was already taking it all back, piece by piece, and this time for good. 3 weeks after Jacob filed the case, I got the call I'd been waiting for. It was from him, early in the morning. His voice was calm, but I could hear the satisfaction underneath it. "Lena," he said, "they opened a federal review. The house is officially under investigation for mortgage fraud." I sat down slowly, my hands trembling. It didn't feel real at first. All those sleepless nights, the pain, the humiliation, it was finally turning into something solid. Jacob explained that Ethan's accounts were frozen and that Tessa's company was being flagged for identity theft and forgery. They couldn't access their money, and every transaction they had made in the last year was being traced. That same afternoon, I drove by the old neighborhood. I hadn't been there since the day I was forced out, but something in me needed to see it. As I turned the corner, I saw the flashing lights before I even reached the driveway. 2 black SUVs were parked in front of the house. Law enforcement officers were talking to Ethan and Tessa on the porch. Ethan looked completely different, tired, unshaven, his shirt wrinkled. Tessa stood next to him, arms crossed, arguing with one of the officers. There was no confidence in her posture now. I parked a little down the street, far enough not to be noticed, and watched. It was a strange feeling, standing there seeing the very scene that mirrored my own humiliation. Except this time, it wasn't me standing on the porch with nowhere to go. It was them. Neighbors had gathered outside, whispering and pointing. Some were recording quietly on their phones, others just stared. The same people who once smiled at Ethan and Tessa at their little parties were now watching their downfall like a live show. Within minutes, officers began taking items out of the house, boxes, furniture, electronics, all marked for evidence. Then came the words I had waited months to hear. The house was being seized as part of the investigation. It was no longer theirs. Ethan tried to argue, waving papers and shouting about a misunderstanding, but no one listened. The more he talked, the angrier he became. Tessa started crying when the officers told her the company accounts were frozen. She kept asking where she was supposed to go. I almost felt sorry for her, but then I remembered how she had smiled when I was being thrown. As I watched them standing there on the front lawn, surrounded by their things piled in boxes, it hit me how poetic it all was. The same driveway where I once stood, helpless and broken, was now the place of their humiliation. They had destroyed everything for greed, and now they were losing it all. I didn't stay long. I didn't need to. I turned my car around and drove away quietly, a small smile forming on my face. For the first time since this nightmare began, I could finally breathe. Justice had arrived on its own time, and it was louder, colder, and far more perfect than anything I could have planned myself. When the court date finally came, I sat beside Jacob in the front row, my heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. The courtroom was cold and silent, except for the soft shuffling of papers. Ethan sat at the defendant's table looking smaller than I had ever seen him. His confident smile was gone. Tessa was there too, sitting apart from him, her face pale and distant. Jacob stood up first and began presenting everything we had gathered: the forged signatures, the fake refinancing documents, the email chains, and the voice recordings where Ethan accidentally admitted his plan. Every detail was laid out clearly and calmly. The judge listened carefully, asking a few questions, and I could see from his expression that the truth was landing exactly as it should. When the handwriting expert took the stand, it was over for Ethan. The comparison between my real signature and the forged ones left no doubt. The expert explained how the forgeries had been traced, copied, and placed on legal documents. Jacob then played one of the voice recordings where Ethan was heard saying, "She'll never notice. It's just a signature." The courtroom went completely silent after that. Ethan's lawyer tried to argue that it was all a misunderstanding, that I had given permission. But Jacob quickly pointed out the inconsistencies: the power of attorney form that was supposedly signed while I was hospitalized, the unexplained account transfers, and the emails Ethan had sent to the lender pretending to be me. It was airtight. There was no room left for lies. Halfway through the second day, Tessa's attorney requested a private meeting. By the next morning, she changed her plea. She agreed to testify against Ethan in exchange for leniency. I watched her walk up to the stand and admit everything. She told the court how Ethan had planned to sell the house, take the profit, and move to another state under a new name. She said he promised her a new start, but when she saw how deep his fraud went, she got scared. Ethan's face turned red as she spoke. He glared at her, but it didn't matter anymore. The truth was out, and no amount of anger could erase it. When it was finally his turn to speak, he didn't even try to deny it. His lawyer advised him to plead guilty, and he did. The judge read out the charges: fraud, forgery, and identity theft. Hearing each one felt like another heavy door closing behind him. When the verdict came, I felt something inside me unclench. Ethan was sentenced, and Tessa received probation for cooperating. I didn't celebrate loudly, but the quiet relief that washed over me was enough. A few months later, I received notice that through restitution, I would regain partial ownership of the house. The rest would be sold, and I'd receive compensation from the insurance company for identity theft and emotional distress. It wasn't just about money, it was about closure. As I held the check in my hands, I realized I finally had something Ethan could never take away again: peace. The day I walked back into that house felt unreal. The front yard was quiet, the same trees stood tall, but everything felt different, lighter somehow. The house that once felt like a grave of betrayal was mine again. After months of court hearings, endless paperwork, and long nights spent rebuilding my life, I finally had the keys in my hand. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the door I had once been thrown out of. When I turned the key, the lock clicked softly, almost like the house was welcoming me back. The rooms were empty, stripped of all the memories Ethan and Tessa had left behind. The furniture was gone, the walls were bare, but it didn't matter. This time, it wasn't about what was inside. It was about who I had become. I walked through every room slowly, touching the walls, feeling the quiet. No shouting, no lies, no manipulation. Just peace. I spent weeks renovating it, not to restore what used to be, but to create something entirely new. Every color, every piece of furniture, every corner had my touch now. The same rooms that once made me feel small now made me feel powerful. I turned the home office, the same one where Ethan had hidden all his lies, into my design studio. It was poetic justice. From that space, I started taking new clients again, building not just my business, but a life that was truly mine. Sometimes I'd catch myself thinking about everything that happened: the lies, the humiliation, the nights I spent crying alone. But instead of pain, there was pride. I had survived it. I had taken every wound and turned it into strength. The woman who once begged her husband to see her worth now needed no one's approval. I was finally free from the idea that love had to be painful to be real. One evening, as the sun set behind the house, I stood on the porch with a cup of coffee. The golden light hit the walls I'd repainted, and for the first time, I smiled without any trace of sadness. I thought about Ethan, how he believed he could erase me by taking what I owned. But all he really did was show me what I was capable of when I had nothing left to lose. He thought breaking me would make me disappear, I whispered to myself. Instead, it made me unstoppable. The house wasn't just mine again. It was a symbol of everything I'd endured and overcome. I realized then that I never really lost my home. I had just been forced to reclaim it, not with anger, but with growth. When someone invites their mistress into your home, don't fight for the walls. Fight for your worth. Because sometimes losing everything is how you discover what can never be taken: your strength, your peace, and your self-respect. And that's something no one can ever steal again.